Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journeys, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2024. And specifically, I'd like to focus our attention on a wonderful Blu-ray set, a multi-disc Blu-ray set, which Criterion released earlier in the year. And it's designated by Criterion overall at spy number 1203. And it is this set right here, which is Chantal Akerman Masterpieces, 1968 to 1978. And indeed, in fact, over the course of a number of videos, we have, you and I, my dear friends, we have been speaking about each of the films that can be found within the contours of this really wonderful and splendid set. And so what I'd like to do today is I'd like to focus our attention one more time on this set to talk about some other aspects of the packaging and supplements and writings that can be found in the booklet with regard to this set from the Criterion Collection, which is Chantal Akerman Masterpieces 1968 to 1978. And so what I'd like to do first is I'd like to focus on the supplements that can be found on the discs with respect to this great set, Chantal Akerman Masterpieces 1968 to 1978. Once again, this has 3 Blu-ray discs overall, with the films spread out over such 3 Blu-ray discs. And so I have, and also I should say that, so there are supplements that can be found that could be said to be tied specifically to those films, but that's not the case for all films. So in fact, actually, what we also have is, in addition to that, we also have supplements that are generally organized, which is another way to say that, for instance, there might be a supplements submenu on Blu-ray disc number 1 and the other discs. And so what I'd like to do now is, we have spoken so far over the course of these videos about the supplements that are tied to the specific films where we see them. But we have thus far not talked about the generally organized supplements on the discs. And so I'd like to propose now to start our conversation first with a discussion of these generally organized Blu-ray supplements. And therefore, that brings our attention, or let me draw our attention, my dear friends, to Blu-ray disc number 1, which has, as we know, a number of films already. But which are arranged here. And I apologize once again for blocking out the image. As we've discussed earlier, the Blu-ray menu is this montage of moving images with sound. And so just in case I don't want to offend the YouTube copyright gods, and so I just put a little block over the frame here in terms of my editing of this video discussion. So I apologize for that. But it's a really nice Blu-ray montage Blu-ray menu, as we've discussed earlier. But so I have Blu-ray disc number 1 here, and it says all the films on such Blu-ray disc number 1, those being Saute ma vie, L'enfant aimé où je joue à être une femme mariée, La chambre, Hotel Monterey, Le 15-8, and Je tu il elle. So those are the films to be found on Blu-ray disc number 1. And then we have general supplements. So let me go to the general supplements menu, and I press it, and we have 3 supplements that emerge. And the first is Be Ruby Rich, and I press the button, and it brings us to a discussion here, or a description of this supplement, and I quote, "In this interview conducted by the Criterion Collection in 2023, critic B. Ruby Rich offers a comprehensive primer to Chantal Akerman's prodigious first decade of filmmaking." So this is a supplement which is new in that we haven't seen it in any previous Criterion release of a Chantal Akerman film. So I think it's new to this particular set, which is really wonderful. And B. Ruby Rich is speaking here in in about a 20-minute interview discussion about the works of Chantal Akerman. It's called A New Way of Seeing. It's really, really great. And it's just as Criterion have described it here. It's a comprehensive primer from someone who knows Akerman's work so much, who is very passionate about the works, and who has such a great command of detail and presence and wonderful observation, and a wonderful way for us to begin to consider the works of Akerman as a whole, at least in the context of this really glorious decade for filmmaking from 68 to 78. And so, being a wonderful guide and a wonderful presence, and giving us wonderful, great teaching moments about these works. So B. Ruby Rich's discussion here is absolutely brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I should point out perhaps that I would think that, my gentle suggestion would be to watch all the films first, and then you can watch the B. Ruby Rich discussion. I think it works out that way because it does go into certain details of some of the films themselves. So if you prefer to not be spoiled, then, or even run the risk of being spoiled, even in terms of minor or to a minor degree, then I would suggest watching the films first. But just keep that in mind. Of course, it doesn't prevent you from watching the B. Ruby Rich discussion anyway, which I think is really brilliant, and it does provide a great introduction and further, I think, jumping off points into one's own Chantal Akerman cinema journey. This is a great place, a really, really great place, and B. Ruby Rich's discussion here is splendid. Talking about evolution, talking about Chantal Akerman as an artist being always curious, ever curious, always pursuing her own vision, and to present something that's really true and authentic to her. And there's something very fascinating too that B. Ruby Rich mentions here about how is it to how would one regard Chantal Akerman as a filmmaker in terms of the context of her place in filmmaking or cinema history? I mean, is she to be regarded as a feminist filmmaker or a great filmmaker? Is she to be regarded as a lesbian filmmaker or a great filmmaker? And this is the way in which Ruby Rich is inviting us to consider that perhaps Chantal Akerman, on her own terms, may have perhaps not necessarily, or may have resisted these types of descriptions with respect to her filmmaking craft and her philosophy and her activities in terms of being a filmmaker artist. And because according to B. Ruby Rich, or as B. Ruby Rich would suggest, perhaps it's this type of categorization that runs the risk of quote unquote becoming diminished, end quote, as B. Ruby Rich discusses it. And I think that's a very interesting way of approaching Chantal Akerman's cinema, in that, and this is something that's also posited towards the end of the B. Ruby Rich discussion, which is that it may be that Chantal Akerman, of course, makes films, makes really compelling sort of cinema, expressions that could be said to be dealing with aspects of feminism and questions and issues arising with respect to the feminism and socio-political commentary, or sexuality and lesbianism, which is also very much part, as B.B. Rich discusses, very much part of the contours of Chantal Akerman cinema as we progress through this 10-year period from 68 to 78, where sexuality is explored, where sexuality of the people that are part of the film, including Chantal Akerman herself, seem to be explored in this way in the context of the films in which they appear, whether they be in a narrative context or perhaps a pseudo or quasi documentary context. This is something that's very, very, I think, integral in terms of an honest, true cinema discussion in the hands of Chantal Akerman. But perhaps what Bieber Biebrich also says is that perhaps this is not the be-all, end-all of what one might call the critical regard of the filmography of Akerman, but rather this is an example of some of the areas in which her films, her cinema work touches upon. And another such area is the depiction and handling and treatment of characters, her female characters, and her and women that are the subject of many of her works that are part of the set as well. And that is to say that her films do handle, I think, in a very indirect and direct way, issues and questions and also considerations about feminism from a social political context, and then also from a very intimate and individualized context, depending on the characters and the people that we meet over the course of the films. It's very much so, and also how cinema is very much in regards to that, not just showing a woman within, say, the frame of a film, but also understanding that the woman may or does oftentimes in the context of the films that we see here by Akerman. The woman knows that she's being filmed, and so how does that then affect, or how does that affect her mannerisms, or how does that affect our way of engaging with these people that we as spectators, as viewers, are watching through the course of these films? And so, and that also is a discussion point that is in the context of Chantal Akerman herself, because as we've remarked, Chantal Akerman does appear in a number of her own films, from L'Enfant aimé, où je joue à être une femme mariée, or La Chambre, or Je tout il elle, or sometimes we might hear the voice, or we might understand a certain performance quality here in other works. So these issues or these considerations, I think, form a very important integral part of Ackerman's filmography writ large, and this is something Bieber Biebrich touches upon so brilliantly and so astutely. But what Bieber Biebrich also touches upon too is that Chantal Akerman also may have resisted these types of descriptions because it was, according to Bieber Biebrich, it was about not necessarily always making some kind of statement in this regard per se, but rather the coinciding of these types of discussion points and issue points on the one hand, and also a real endeavor to try to express something that is truly something that Akerman wanted to express, something that is a very direct conduit with her very fiber, her very being, something that she wanted to say. So this is, I think, a really beautiful way of describing Akerman cinema as a way of, in a sense, suggesting to us, which is an echo of something that we will see somewhere else in some of the supplements throughout the course of this set overall. But this is, I think, a very important point to make, because Chantal Akerman is and will always be a filmmaker who is, through her films, telling us something about herself, something that she wants to say at a given moment, whether it's something about maybe the sort of the pretense of domesticity, in a manner of speaking, in an early work like Saute ma vie, or L'Enfant aimé, où je joue à être une femme mariée, or the idea of presence and space and alienation and temporal qualities in works like La Chambre or Je tout il elle, or perhaps the idea of rituals and dynamics and the notion of a sense of behavioral observations within a sort of a strictly situated, say, environmental or physical present setting, like, say, Jean Dillman, 23 quai de commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, or spaces and time like Hotel Monterey and News from Home, etc. And also very much dealing with the idea of the past and reconciling and reckoning with the past, which is also something that we see in News from Home and Les Rendez-vous d'Anna, etc. So this is to say that Chantal Akerman cinema is first and foremost something of a true embodiment of her own self-expression that touches upon many aspects such as themes of sexuality and such as themes of feminism, etc., and also themes and ideas and concerns that always, always, always are very directly relevant to Chantal Akerman at the moment that she's making that work, which is a really great way of describing the cinema of Akerman, as B. Ruby Rich would describe it here. Really great. And then also going through the films themselves, and just also mentioning to how Ackerman's life and her biography, how this informed a lot of her choices and the filmography that we are, I think, very, very privileged to be able to watch within this box set here. So details surrounding Saute Ma Vie and how Chantal Akerman made this when she was around 18 years of age, trying to capture a Chaplinesque or burlesque quality in terms of the physical comedy, but also how this might be regarded as being something that is opposite to comedy in terms of the biting, not just satirical edge, but also the way in which it ends, and it really has a sense of finality that has some very haunting echoes with Chantal Akerman's own life. That B. Ruby Rich does make note of. And also the film L'Enfant aimé ou Je joue à être une femme mariée, she speaks here, or B. Ruby Rich speaks here, for instance, about how, for example, how women are portrayed in front of the camera and how they behave with the knowledge of the camera being present as well. And this also includes Chantal Akerman, who is one of the key figures within this work, and just noting too, in that context, aspects of daily life and discussions of sex and sexuality within the context of married life, etc. And then B. Ruby Rich then also adds aspects of the biography of Akerman, about how Akerman went to New York when she was around 21 years of age. And then also B. Ruby Rich talks too about how, of course, there's a lot of mention made about the importance of experimental film, avant-garde film, that Akerman discovered during his time, but also a key influence is meeting Babette Mangold, who becomes a very strong artist and friend and collaborator with Chantal Akerman during this period, or starting with this period, and that will lead to great works together, La Chambre and Jean Dillman, 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles. And there's an interesting anecdote told or recounted here about such film from 1975, about how there's a remark, a review or critic mentioning how there were very low angles, and how the low angles reminded this critic or reviewer of the filmmaker Yasujiro Ozu. And B. Ruby Rich recounts this anecdote in saying that, Akerman and Mangold didn't seek to necessarily aim for that per se, but rather they were thinking about the low camera angles, because Akerman herself described herself as being someone who was physically short, in terms of her own height on the one hand, and then also Bambet Mangold was mentioning too about how the low angles were, in a sense, reminding of how, for instance, John Ford would shoot the figure of John Wayne from low angles to essentially make him larger than life on the screen. It was the same kind of thing for Mangold and Akerman to make the characters in a film like Jean Dillman, 23 Quai du Commerce 1080 Bruxelles, as being larger than life, which I think is, it really reminds me too about being able to regard this film as being something very grand and operatic as well, which I'd never quite considered before until I was this remark. I heard this remark, which is a really an example of why this B. Ruby Rich discussion is so brilliant, and you learn so much from it. I certainly have, and I continue to do so. I will continue to do so. And there's this idea too of La Chambre and connections with Proust and the room, and not leaving the room, and the passage of time, which is also very brilliant. And then also too I think the invitation of considering some aspects of her works as being maybe in part maybe not in whole necessarily, but certainly in part, having an autobiographical feel to it, or an injection to it. And so this is very important too when considering Les Rendezvous d'Anna, and also the nature of works like News from Home, and the importance of her relationship with her mother, and also to remembering the contours of her life, that she went to New York in the early 1970s, and then returned to Europe, and went to Paris, and was in Paris for a little bit. And this was very important according to B. Ruby Rich, because this was around the time of this was post 1968, and the sort of social political climate, and the exchange of ideas, and feminism and lesbianism, and the MLF, and examples of writings about feminism in the context of, say, modern art and modern cinema, from essayists and writers like and thinkers like Linda Nochlin, etc., about female artists in particular. And also, this is a segue, I think, as B. Ruby Rich discusses it, a segue into Chantal Akerman herself, and relying on the Groucho Marx joke that she wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have someone like her. She wouldn't want to be a part of a club that had someone like her as a member. And so this was a similar kind of thing, which is, again, going back to where we began, which is maybe this was B. Ruby Rich's understanding of Chantal Akerman, the artist and the person, as being someone who maybe might have resisted being compartmentalized, or being described in a certain way, whereas she may have wanted to resist that. And an example that she cites is the MLF had, according to B. Ruby Rich, the MLF had sought to maybe make a film working with Chantal Akerman, but Akerman had declined such offer, which is perhaps a way to say too that there is something about Chantal Akerman that is seeking something truly intimate and truly honest. It doesn't necessarily have to conform to certain, maybe certain compartment or label or description per se. It may have some convergence and may have some overlap. But first and foremost, it seems to be the intent in saying something that really is true to her, something that she wants to say, and which is really quite remarkable indeed. And also, too, we understand that part of this discussion is an understanding of how Chantal Akerman as an artist is someone who's very versatile and is trying new things as well. There's a way of maybe looking at her early work within the span of these 10 years as being the documentary films. And I think that's that's one possible way of looking at them, of course, but that also suggests to, or reminds us that she did work too with narrative film structure, such as Jean Dielman, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, or Les Rendezvous d'Anna, and also working with very famous actors who had their own legacy and their own connections with traditions of cinema, such as Léa Massari and Les Rendezvous d'Anna, or Delphine Seyrig in Jean Dielman, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, and how this is, and also working within the narrative structure and a fictional narrative in cinema, such as in other films like Je tu, il, elle. And so this was very much part of her cinema language and grammar, and goes towards her versatility as an artist. And in B. Ruby Rich's words, a truly great artist, of the ages. So this is a brilliant discussion from B. Ruby Rich. So I strongly recommend it, definitely, if you're able to watch it. This is approximately 20 minutes. And again, it can be found in the general supplements menu on Blu-ray disc number 1. But that's not all, because then we have Hanging Out Yonkers. And this is described as Chantal Akerman shot this 1973 documentary in a juvenile rehabilitation center in Yonkers, New York, with cinematographer Babette Mangold. After the sound rushes were lost, the film was never finished. Its most complete version is presented here. This is really quite. This is really quite great to have this be part of the set. So it could be said to be a part of the filmography of Chantal Akerman and Babette Mangold. So in that way, I think it belongs very nicely within the context of the 68 to 78 10-year time span in terms of the Chantal Akerman masterpieces here. And it's silent, so you don't hear the sound. It is approximately 27 minutes what we have here. And we do have these scenes in what are described as this rehabilitation center in New York, in Yonkers, New York, and we have shots of these youths. They look like maybe teenagers, and they are in this room. They're sitting around a circle, maybe they're talking, but we don't hear what they're saying, but we see them, or it looks like the semblance of talking, maybe a group discussion. And then also we see in the same room, or maybe nearby, also indoors, playing pool, as part of the activities, and so we see a number of them playing pool, maybe exchanging the cues, taking turns with the shots, and also different angle as well of the camera. And also there's a moment where playing board game or chess, and also sitting, talking to maybe shots of one or two of them at a given moment, and talking. Again, we can't hear anything, but we might assume that they're talking with each other as the camera's capturing them, or they're talking to someone off camera. We're not quite sure, but this is, I think, very fascinating, because we get a sense of the room and the rhythm, and we do see perhaps how people respond and react to each other, and we also see a kind of situational contextual behavioral aspect to this, in that even when we see things like maybe they're in the same room, a large room with a pool table on one end and maybe a circle of chairs on the other, there is a kind of behavioral difference, contextually speaking, when we see the youth sitting in the circle versus when they're playing pool, or maybe when they're talking to us, or maybe looking at the camera. So this is, I think, very much a part of the Akerman aesthetic that we've touched upon, and also was touched upon by B. Ruby Rich in the great supplement before, which is maybe the subjects and the people in the film are maybe being regarded by us, the spectator, but also they have the knowledge of the camera on them. So maybe it's something about something behavioral, how people act, how people respond, the stimuli that might create a certain chain reaction of physical and emotional responses. And sometimes maybe in that context the words are not important, in a manner of speaking. And so it's about the mannerisms to a certain degree. And so and it reminds me too of something that Chantal Akerman might say elsewhere, in that maybe sometimes, of course, the words become important in a certain way of viewing a film, like News from Home or Jean Gilman 23 qui de commerce 1080 Bruxelles, when there's a scene with reading letters, etc. But also there's a way in which those moments of letter reading are done in a very monotone way, almost to suggest that it's the rhythms and the cadences of the words matched with the image, rather than the actual words themselves, which is something that Chantal Akerman does mention elsewhere. Therefore, which is another way to say that maybe Hanging Out Yonkers in that way is also very much inviting us to consider it within the context and scope of the filmography in its own way, by many points of connectivity, one of which being allowing us to examine these people in terms of the sort of behavioral mannerisms, without the advent of sound, or without the availability of sound. We are still able, and I think in a very acute way, we're able to hone in on this, or zero in on this type of aspect. So Hanging Out Yonkers, its inclusion here, I think, is incredibly important, and it's really wonderful to have it. Really, really wonderful to have it. So please check this out if you can. And then the third of the supplements, generally situated on Blu-ray disc number 1, are the film school tests. And we have 4 film school tests. We have Brussels Film 1 and Brussels Film 2, and Knokke Film 1 and Knokke Film 2. And these are each approximately 3 minutes. And this is described as Chantal Akerman shot these 4 pieces in 1967 as part of her application to Belgium's INSAS Film School. Though she dropped out shortly after enrolling, the exercises offer insight into some of the director's earliest cinematic instincts. I'm sorry, I said INSAS. I should really say, and please pardon me for my very poor French skills here, but I will do my very best. But this is INSAS, or l'Institut Supérieur des Arts du Spectacle. And so this is the film school, and we understand that Chantal Akerman did apply and did get into the film school, but then dropped out. But we understand these are the film tests that she used in order to, as part of her application, to apply to get into the school. And so we have some of them. One, for instance, the first one dealing with maybe a kind of we see. Maybe the handling of a certain area, and also another one we see a childhood friend, or someone that's described as a childhood friend, and then also in the third and fourth ones we Knokke, and also the same childhood friend is featured in certain situations and settings. So these are really fascinating too, and these are also they each have notes at the end, so you can go along with what's being done here in the context of these tests themselves. So, an early indication of I think the natural innate eye and the great talent that Chantal Akerman has. Really interesting, and also an interesting reminder too that she ended up, or through her own choice, dropping out of film school not long after. So very interesting indeed. But this is again further indication of Chantal Akerman, the artist and filmmaker. And it's great to have these here as well. So the film school tests, we have 4 of them here again as part of the generally situated supplements on Blu-ray disc number 1. And so that concludes our discussion of the Blu-ray disc number 1 generally situated supplements. And so you can watch those, as well as any supplement that might be found linked with each of the films. And for the information about that, where they are available, I would very gently direct your attention, for instance, to our discussions on this YouTube channel about each of those films. So where we have discussed those films, I have spoken about the film-specific supplements that could be found with them where they are available. But other than those, here is Blu-ray disc number 1's generally situated supplements. So now what I've done is I have taken out Blu-ray disc number 1 from the machine, and I have put in Blu-ray disc number 2. And Blu-ray disc number 2, as we have discussed, has the film Jean Dillman, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. And then we also have, together with this film on this disc, we have the supplements menu, and we have the 4 supplements that are included on this Blu-ray disc number 2. Those being Autour de Jean Dillman, and then Chantal Akerman on Jean Dillman, and then Chantal Akerman and Delphine Seyrig, and then Babette Mangold. In fact, we have already discussed these supplements when we talked about, or when we had our video discussion on the film, Jean Dillman, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles. So if you are interested in what these supplements are, I would very gently direct your attention to that video discussion if you're interested. But please note, as I noted there, that these supplements could also be found on the earlier Blu-ray release of Jean Dillman, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, which is the Criterion Blu-ray from some years back. So they've carried those over, some of them anyway, on this Blu-ray disc number 2. And so now what I've done is I have taken out Blu-ray disc number 2, and I have put in Blu-ray disc number 3. And Blu-ray disc number 3 has the films News from Home and Les Rendez-vous d'Anna. And so we have those films being made available. And then we also have the generally situated supplements on Blu-ray disc number 3. So I should point out that News from Home does not have its own supplements specifically linked to News from Home, but Les Rendezvous d'Anna does. The one-on-one discussion with the actor Aurore Clément as part of that, which we discussed when we talked about Les Rendezvous d'Anna. That's a really great discussion, by the way. But then we have the generally situated supplements on this Blu-ray disc number 3. So let us now turn our attention to these generally situated Blu-ray 3 disc supplements. And I press the button here, and it says, the first one being, in her own words. And this is, let me press the button here, excuse me, and it's described by Criterion as, and I quote, "This visual essay, produced by the Criterion Collection in 2023, builds upon rare radio interviews that Chantal Akerman gave in 1975 and 1977, in which she reflects on her films and her ascendance to critical success." This is approximately 23 minutes, and this is a video essay or visual essay with some clips from the films that are edited together to match the words, the audio excerpted words. There's a really brief, beautiful introduction from Agnes Varda at the very beginning, and mentioning, among other great compliments and praise-worthy compliments, wonderful praise about Chantal Akerman. She mentions, for instance, how Akerman's art is like Robert Bresson on the one hand and Andy Warhol on the other, sort of Bressonian, wonderful interior inspection or introspection on the one hand, and also the sort of Warhol virtuoso exhibitionism on the other, which I think is a really great way of describing it as well. And then we go into the words of Chantal Akerman herself. Again, excerpted from interviews from 75 and 77, where, among other things, she talks about her background, her childhood, her relationship with her parents, her mother and her father, and where she was born, etc. And then talking about her films and her first foray into films. One of the major ways she did that is through the short film Saute ma vie, and talking too about film school and maybe the pressures of marriage, at least sort of, the social mores, the external pressures, etc. And then talking about other works like Hotel Monterey, and then New York, and also this opportunity for her to talk about how she felt about New York. And she brings up her own background, her own Jewish background, and how she was very much attracted to New York on the one hand. But also she was feeling very alone and isolated, as she describes it, in terms of being not from the area, but being very much an outsider. But then she was able to meet people like Babette Mangold, who formed a really strong bond and relationship that plays out in many key works of Chantal Akerman. So, and then a discussion too about La Chambre, and she says how this is her actual room, and how it really moved her. And she talked even about how she loved the situated way of the windows, how it played with the space, the two windows she mentioned. That's so really wonderful. And then she talks about a discussion of Je tu il elle, this really brilliant work, Je tu il elle, and going to France, or going back to Europe and going to France, and how she was always thinking about, in terms of the artistry, the idea of a crutch, the idea of what to lean on in terms of a particular story. And here she's speaking about the narrative structure being the so-called crutch for her approach of Je tu il elle, and working with Claire Waution, and also talking about herself as Chantal Akerman. And she acknowledges that she is not a classically trained actor, but that she was okay with that. But not only was she okay with that, because she appears very prominently in the film Je t'ai elle, but that she was looking for that kind of, maybe for lack of a better phrase, maybe that kind of imperfection, that kind of maybe unexpected quality that her performance might bring, as she herself describes it, that her performance might bring, her not being necessarily a classically trained actor. But I think it worked really marvelously. So, and then her discussion here, in her own words, then goes to the work Jean Dilleman, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, and then also talking to, again, about this film in the context of her own Jewish identity, and looking at the film, or one of the lenses through which one can examine this work, is through that sense of identity. And also, there's a way in which this film, Jean Dilleman, 23 Quai du Commerce, 1080 Bruxelles, has this notion, among other things, about space and time. And as we've spoken about, to the character as portrayed by Delphine Seyrig, how she is regarding her own sense of self in space and time, or how it may or may not be a kind of self-regarding of that sort. And also the film deals with its relationship to a sense of chaos and violence, as we know, or potentially so. So, so this is and also she mentions too, as part of her cinematic approach or cinematic style, sometimes the frame is fixed, or the camera is fixed, but this allows the viewer to look and inspect the frame on their own volition, just looking wherever they want to look, which I think is a really, really, it's putting a lot of great faith in the viewers themselves, which I think is a real powerful aspect of Akerman's own cinema, to put so much trust and faith in the viewers. I think it's really wonderful. So, and then the discussion goes to another film, which is News from Home, which is what another film we have discussed here, and how she describes it as being a film about exile, or being in exile. And here she wanted it to be about that feeling. She could have, as she acknowledges, maybe made a film that could have been, quote unquote, a conventional narrative, someone coming to New York and receiving letters, and maybe the narrative story being alone, or something of that sort. She could have done so, which might have been a very interesting cinematic exercise and a really fascinating film in and of itself. But she chose not to do it in that way. She chose to recount the letters from her mother. And then also she mentioned something too about the recording of sound for this film, which I never realized until I heard this from her. So I learned something new all the time when watching Criterion releases such as this. And so about the sound recording, very fascinating. And also she mentions about how, the words and the rhythms of the words are important, and the words themselves are important, but also it was the way in which the words sometimes receded into the background, and the sound took over the soundtrack, etc. So it was maybe not necessarily all the time about what the words actually were, but rather what the rhythms were, and how that interacted with the sounds that were chosen for that particular image. So, this is Chantal Akerman, the artist extraordinaire, absolutely brilliant. And then, shooting the city as well, the city with so many centers to it, and so shooting the city from this vantage point of the car, which I think is also really great. And then to the discussion of Les Rendez-vous d'Anna, how it's not wholly autobiographical, but there are some aspects that could be said to be taken from her own, say, perspective. And the idea about, because the filmmaker, the artist, is the main character here, and so one of the aspects too is how making films can be a very scary and daunting and terrifying experience. That's what she says here. Also, to the context of the travel log aspect of this, from country to country to country in Europe, and how this was the opportunity for our main character to meet certain characters, that also was a reflection to of a kind of reckoning of sort of pre-war and post-war Europe. And also how the characters that she encounters seem to have their own, maybe their own issues and their own situations. For instance, maybe some might regard Anna as being a kind of someone without uh, not necessarily being rooted in one place or the other. And in fact, Anna perhaps could be described in that way because she is a kind of traveler in that respect. So perhaps this is a kind of fantasy vision of one of the characters that she meets early on in the film. Also, there's other characters that may be suggesting a kind of, for lack of a better phrase, the option of domesticity and choosing that this life over this life that she currently has in terms of a freedom to move, but rather having roots in a sort of domestic setting. But perhaps this might not necessarily be a pathway to happiness or fulfillment. It might be, but it might not be. So that's something that is hinted at as well. And also to something about the revolutionary spirit and how it seems to have died down in an encounter with yet another character that Anna has over the course of this film. So the idea of the revolution, bourgeois domesticity, and sort of how that maybe challenges Anna or maybe reinforces Anna's own independent spirit, and how this becomes part of the crux of the film. So here we get a kind of primer too. We had the primer about Chantal Akerman's works on Blu-ray disc #1 with the Be Rich discussion, which is really great. And here we have another primer from Chantal Akerman herself, which is also really wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So my strong recommendation here is please watch all the films first. I think that's I strongly recommend that, and then you can watch and listen to the great words of Chantal Akerman here in her own words. So this is approximately 23 minutes. So that's the first of the supplements on Blu-ray disc #3. And second is Chantal Akerman on filmmaking. And it's described as, the following footage is excerpted from Chantal Akerman par Chantal Akerman, a 1997 episode of the French television program Cinéma de Notre Temps. This is approximately 17 minutes. And this is really great. We've seen it before in an earlier Blu-ray release from Criterion here, but as a supplement. But it's nice to have it here again. We have Chantal Akerman in a room that's really lovely with dog and tables and the window in the back and personal computer and desks. And then we have Chantal Akerman coming, and she's sitting in a chair, and sort of shot, and then maybe a medium, and then a close-up. But we see her speaking to the camera or someone off camera with a piece of paper of things that she's written about the proposal to feature a filmmaker and how that ended up being her. She became the subject of this of a filmmaker profile. And so what would she say about herself and her filmmaking and her filmmaker profile? And so this was part of the struggle and the conceit that she had when she was writing, and thus delivering this writing to us. She's reading her words. And then it's very fascinating. This is an attempt at a self-portrait. It's really lovely. Some moments, I mean, it's really lovely. For instance, the anecdote or the story about the cow that she mentions here is really great. And also to the idea of not liking labels. This is how she describes it, which is again a lovely tie-in to how Be Ruby Rich in Blu-ray disc #1 supplement was speaking about this same point as well, and also talking about another great anecdote with her mother and canvases, which is really lovely, and then also the success of works like Jeanne Dillman, 23 qui du commerce 1080 Bruxelles, which meant in a way that maybe she was looking at her own works in a different way, which I think is a really bold and brave statement that she makes here, among the many other statements here that she makes, which is excellent. Chantal Akerman, whenever there's the opportunity to watch or listen to an interview, such as some of the other supplements we've had elsewhere, and also for Blu-ray disc #3, in her own words, the first supplement and now the second supplement, which is Chantal Akerman on filmmaking. Any chance you have to watch or listen to or read a Chantal Akerman interview, please take advantage of it. It's really great. It's absolutely great. So And this itself, it's its own little film, right? Because it's a self-portrait in a manner of speaking. It was not manner of speaking. It is a self-portrait, and we could also say that it has therefore links with earlier works that may or may not also have that similar type of self-portrait quality, such as La Chambre, or such as L'Enfant d'Aimé, ou Je joue à une femme mariée, or Je tue il elle, to a certain degree as well. So wonderful. So please watch that if you can. And then Natalia Akerman, her mother. It's described here as, in 2007, an off-camera Chantal Akerman interviewed her mother, Natalia Akerman, about her own films. The producers of the interview intended to edit out Chantal's questions, but ultimately decided to preserve the candid mother-daughter rapport. This is approximately 28 minutes. You could also find it on the earlier Blu-ray of Jean Diamant, 23 qui commence 1080 Bruxelles. And this is really great. This is really great. This is one of my favorite supplements. You have Natalia Akerman sitting at a table in the kitchen with a fixed camera, and for almost the entirety of it, you have the same angle, and you have Chantal Akerman's voice off camera, and almost entirely not visible, but you hear her voice. I say almost entirely because there's a moment where you might see Chantal Akerman reach for the upper cupboard for some cups and a glass. Oh, this is really great because Natalia Akerman is speaking she's framed much like Jean Dillman. The character is framed in the 1975 film in a kitchen that looks very similar to the kitchen in the film Jean Dillman, 23 qui commence 1080 Bruxelles. And it's framed in a very similar way. So whenever I saw the Natalia Akerman interview here, I always thought this was in an interesting way, a kind of sequel, a spiritual sequel, if you will, to the 1975 film. Natalia Akerman in her comments here are so wonderful and so rich and so spirited and so intelligent. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, for instance, she speaks about Saute-Ma-Ville at the beginning, and watching it, maybe how Chantal Akerman's father saw it and began to worry about their daughter, and maybe the idea too but Natalia Akerman wanted, maybe it was in the middle of that maybe tense relationship between father and daughter, but as it's described a little bit later as well. And then talking too about where that was shot, and the pots that were in the cupboard, and where the certain pans were, and are they still there? Where it was this lovely discussion. Very, these are about memories of the family, shared memories of mother and daughter as well. And this is really lovely. And then also speaking too about how Natalia Akerman really adored and admired Delphine Seyrig. Uh, um, a lot of grace, a lot of class, and a lot of a wonderful type of aura. Really respected her very much, and to remember the filming of Jean Dillman, 23 qui commence 1080 Bruxelles, with also Samy videotaping a lot of the shooting, which ended up becoming the hour or so sort of making of behind-the-scenes documentary, which we discussed when we talked about Blu-ray disc number 2. At least that's what I assume, anyway. Also, too, how Natalia Akerman remarks about how she really was so pleasantly surprised about when she saw the film. It was that she understood that her daughter, Chantal Akerman, was really watching and observing a lot of what was going on, and the cooking and the preparing of the meals, and about how she was saying how, oh, you really saw how your aunts were making meatballs. And that, I think, is a really lovely way of describing it. And just, again, that's why it was a 3-hour film, because it was really giving time and energy and devotion to these tasks, which were, in the world of the film, really important. So as really lovely, lovely comments. And also, too, about the idea of there's an interesting, I mean, she's so astute. Natalia Akerman is about things like social political context, about the need for control and authority to a certain degree on the one hand, but also the need for freedom on the other. And you can't go too extremely in one direction or another. You need a little bit of both. in order to be able to succeed in terms of individual freedom and also a kind of societal considerations, which I think is a very interesting, almost maybe unintentional or intentional, I'm not sure, a really interesting, almost political statement that she's making. And also speaking too about news from home, the letters, and when she saw the film, she was almost embarrassed about the letters that she was she sounded kind of silly from her point of view, and also reminded her too about uh, just the letters and worrying about Chantal Akerman, and again a reminder too about the relationship between Chantal Akerman and her mother, the relationship between Chantal Akerman and her father. A reminder of another film too called Golden 80s, and also to I forgot to mention, I should have mentioned this. Let me mention it now, which is a little bit earlier in the conversation. Natalia Akerman is asked about her experience, or the idea of change, and people who are survivors of the war and change, and how maybe it might be said that for some survivors, change was something that was maybe people were a little bit hesitant about or maybe scared of, and how change, or maybe things that are the same or repeated, have a sense of stability and also safety. And I think Natalia Akerman does mention this, and we're reminded about how Natalia Akerman was a survivor of the concentration camps during World War II. And so she talks a little bit about her experiences and the idea of how everything was so internalized. Little change, like if you're feeling tired or you're injured, you had to internalize it, according to what she says, because if you showed it, then this would be this could be an excuse for someone in someone who is running the camp, the Nazis running the camp, someone to come and kill. So it had to be completely hidden and less internalized, and so that type of internalization process could be said to be part of the internalization process of people like Jeanne Dielman. Again, from the context of a type of emotional dealing with or reckoning with the outside world, in a manner of speaking. So I thought this commentary was, I mean, it's made mention a little bit in some of the writings by Beatrice Loisel, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this video, but I found that to be very powerful. Very, very powerful, and yet another way, I think, to read the work of Chantal Akerman, such as Jean Dielman, 23 quai du commerce, 1080 So, and really great. And then there's a really lovely way that this film, not this film, but this discussion ends with a reference that she makes, Natalia Akerman makes, to Alfred Hitchcock and the cameos that were made in Alfred Hitchcock films, and how, in a way, there are cameos that were made in Chantal Akerman's films, featuring her mother in some respects. So I really like this because this was in 2007. And perhaps they had no way of knowing it in 2007, but of course, some years later, there would be, I mean, one of the Sight and Sound greatest films of all time critics poll, and you'd have Vertigo, an Alfred Hitchcock film, which was, I think, selected as being the greatest film of all time around, what was it, 2012, and then Jean Dielman, 23 quai du commerce, 1080 being selected the greatest film of all time in 2022. So it's interesting to have this link between Alfred Hitchcock and Chantal Akerman. That is expressed by Natalia Akerman in 2007. So it's really interesting. Maybe a really interesting sort of foreshadowing, if you will. But in any event, this is a very, very great interview, and to listen to the rapport between mother and daughter. You hear Chantal Akerman's voice, and you just she's trying to guide her in terms of the questions, because they know this being filmed. Sometimes maybe there's a little bit of a disconnect. There's follow-up, but maybe Natalia Akerman follows up on Chantal Akerman, and vice versa, etc. So there's this wonderful, beautiful rapport between mother and daughter here that's also caught. And you understand, therefore, how Natalia Akerman the relationship with Natalia Akerman, her mother, is such an important one to her. Really beautiful indeed. So you have this interview, which you can watch, and I strongly encourage you to do so. This is approximately 28 minutes. And that concludes the supplements that can be found on Blu-ray disc number 3. So the generally situated ones anyway. So my strong suggestion is for each of these supplements to watch the films first, and then for the generally situated ones to watch all the films first, and then you can enjoy all the comments that are made here, and they are really, really great. And then next, I would like to talk about the booklet, the wonderful booklet. This is the staple booklet, and it has 44 pages, not including the front and the back cover. And this is really lovely. This is really great. I've looked through this a number of times already, and so I've read it through number of times, and it's great for so many reasons, just in terms of its design, and we'll talk about the design in a moment, but just the essays. We have one comprehensive essay, which is an overview of Chantal Akerman's life and art in this period of years 68 to 78, and touching upon each of the films as well, and also the biographical touchstone points as well. This is the essay, The Weight of Being by Beatrice Loaza, and this is so wonderful. A really wonderful, comprehensive essay beginning on page 2. My strong recommendation is with the essay here, please, I strongly recommend to watch all the films first, and then you can read the great essay here of Beatrice Loaza. Again, it goes extends to page 11. But that's not all from Beatrice Loaza, because as we've mentioned over the course of our discussion of each of the films, there is a mini essay that accompanies each of the films, together with a still or pictures, as well as information about the cast and crew and other fundamental technical information. And these are also written by Beatrice Loaza, and they are not synopses, but they are critical essays. So you get the overall essay at the start of the booklet, and you have each film critical essay. So there's a lot of writing here, as well as the great contours of the pictures, and like, this is such a great book. And just to this, the materials, to just details such as the paper that's being used, it has a lovely textural feel to it, which I admire very much. So this is one of the best. This is one of the best indeed. I'm very, very pleased with this booklet, so please check this out if you can. And speaking of the look of it and the feel and the design, I love this red motif with the white text and the pictures and the blocks that are used here, and the pictures that are used here. That is and that is, of course, seen in the cover art design for the box itself, which I really like very much. For art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, designer Century, art production coordinator William Breeze, art assistant Julie Sussman, and menu animations Ignacio Montalvo. So well done for that. I'm very pleased with the aesthetic choices made for the cover art designs and the like. And this is the it's a why am I forgetting? It's a digipack, which means it's sort of this cardboard outer shell with the inner shell as well, showing this the discs, and the discs are in this stacked way. So the 3 discs stacked in this way with the booklet. It can be resting in this way. So you put the booklet here, and then make sure it's there neatly. I have to be a bit more careful. I apologize for my lack of care in treating this, but and it should go in like so. And we have the exterior shell on the back showing here, and then we have the inner shell, and then the back of the inner shell with some the list of the films and some shots from each of the films, and it goes in like so. And then there you have the set from Criterion. Chantal Akerman Masterpieces, 1968 to 1978, from the Criterion Collection. Yeah, this is a really great set. I think if I had to say one thing, it would be I would have loved to have seen this set in, say, a huge box with big dimensions, like the Agnes Varda set or the Ingmar Bergman set. or the Pasolini 101 set from last year. That would have been really cool, just to give it. There's something really almost majestic about sets like that. So it would have been great to have had the Chantal Akerman Masterpieces set in the same type of oversized dimensions, physically speaking, anyway. But I think that perhaps is a very minor criticism on my part. Because of course ultimately it comes to it's about the films as well, and so we have all these films over the course of these 3 Blu-ray discs in this great one-stop place, in a manner of speaking. It of course is not the entirety of Chantal Akerman's filmography, and that maybe that is another thing I could say. It would have been nice to have had films beyond 1978, because we know that Chantal Akerman's filmography, it's really interesting when it goes into the 1980s and beyond. It goes into some fascinating places, and talk about versatility. Oh my goodness, it's one of the great, absolutely great. It would have been lovely to have had the set that was that extended over more years beyond 1968 to 1978, but maybe, if we could get a volume 2 of these sets, that would have been, that will be definitely welcome indeed. But again, we're not getting the entirety of the body of work of Chantal Akerman, so just keep that in mind. But we are getting a really dynamic period in her life and her art, which is described, I think, in really wonderful detail in the supplements and the essays that are found within the set, as well as the films themselves. And they invite a lot of questioning, a lot of discussion and challenges. They're also very entertaining, very suspenseful, and funny and sharp and shocking and beautiful and warm and intimate and romantic and inviting, and also cold and mysterious and ethereal, and very much enigmatic, and they touch upon certain social political and social political cultural commentary themes, and themes about sex and sexuality, and themes about romance, and things about belonging and kind of togetherness, and also isolation and being alone, and also time and space, and how the individual figures into that passage of time and interaction with space, whether it be the room or the city, or the passage or the flow of a camera to suggest time, or maybe the sudden sharp edit that leads to a sudden jump from afternoon light to early evening hours, etc. So. And all the films that we have here, I think, in their own way, are very emblematic of Chantal Akerman's own artistry and great cinematic approach, genius cinematic approach. So this is a great set, a really wonderful set. So I'm really happy that this is here for as many people to see as possible, I hope. So this is the Chantal Akerman Masterpieces 1968 to 1978. 3-disc Blu-ray set from Criterion. Oh, if you haven't gotten this yet, what are you waiting for, my dear friends? Please check it out if you can. I really hope that you enjoy it, and please let me know what you think for those who have this great set. So with that, my dear friends, that's it for now. Thank you so much for joining me along the way for this journey into the world of Chantal Akerman's films from 1968 to 1978, and so I very much enjoyed myself, and it was great to be able to speak with you as well. And so I look forward to seeing you at the next video, my dear friends. Until then, I very much hope that you continue to be happy and healthy and well, and that you continue to watch a lot of great movies, including the works of Chantal Akerman, including other films in the Criterion Collection and beyond. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.